The Olympics of Serenity have become the one thing the Germans didn't want it to be, the Olympics of Terror. That was Jim McKay. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. The Olympics. That one thing that every 4 years or so, we drop everything and pretend we care about, track and field or whatever other sports are in the Olympics. I don't care because they got rid of baseball, which is stupid. Anyway, the other thing that occasionally happens at the Olympics is things explode, like in Atlanta, the year that Kurt Angle won a gold medal with a broken frickin' neck. So this episode is going to be multiple parts. It's going to be 2 parts. It has the potential to be way more than that if I wanted it to become a series on geopolitics and how war has been going in the Middle East for literally thousands of years, but I don't really want to muddy everything up with that because I have personal feelings about what's going on over there. To be completely open and honest, I don't really care. As an American, I am tired of watching us give my tax money to these guys to shoot rockets at these guys who we also give our tax money to. I hate it. I'm over it. Same with Russia and Ukraine. I don't care. I don't care about any of that. I know it's probably not the best thing to say because I know people are dying and stuff, but I'm kind of the mind where it's not our problem. We have enough things here to worry about and to try to fix, instead of sending billions of dollars to different countries so that they can try to kill each other. Yeah, that's kind of where I fall with that. Oh, that's going to piss people off. Whatever. I want to focus on this one particular event in the aftermath of kind of the effect that it had on the world. So there's really not a ton of backstory. We're going to kind of just jump into it because the Middle East has never been a peaceful place. The Middle East will probably never be a peaceful place, especially these 2 particular countries that we're about to talk about. 1972, Germany was a very different place. The country is divided into East and West and less than 30 years removed from World War II. And when I say East and West, I mean you have East Germany, which is run by the Soviets, and West Germany, which is run by allegedly the English and the US, but I don't really know how much input the English had there. I know the US was there because there's a power vacuum. Where you find a power vacuum, you'll find the United States government. Anyway, this was the first time the Olympics had been held in Germany since 1936, which was basically just a reason for Hitler to wave his dick at the world and get really upset when Jesse Owens was super fast and beat all the white men. Another important and very symbolic event happened at these Olympics. This is the first time since the formation of Israel as a country that any of their athletes or representatives have been to Germany since the end of World War II. Because a thing happened, right, that would probably upset Israelis who are Jewish. We'll talk about that later. We'll eventually on this show come around to the point where we talk about World War II once or twice. German authorities and the Olympic Committee were both understandably nervous about this, considering the wounds of the Holocaust are still fresh in the minds of the entire world. Germans are still the bad guys, you know? And if you had an action movie in the 70s or 80s, very good chance that one of your bad guys in it is German or Russian. Because we we hadn't invaded the Middle East yet to make them bad guys. And just making the Chinese bad guys all the time, that's hack, you know? Or North Koreans or Cubans. Even though Red Dawn, the original Red Dawn, is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. Love that. Someday. Not an episode, but like someday it'll actually happen. And there'll be folks out there just loot dropping North Korean troops out of the sky, or Russians, and getting some of those super cool AK-12s or whatever they're running at that point. But someday. They wanted to prove that West Germany had become more progressive, and they welcomed the Jewish athletes with open arms. Part of this show of being more progressive was to show as little evidence of police and military security as possible. They thought that showing like any amount of force would be in poor taste. In the business, that's what we call foreshadowing. Even though the Germans thought that this was a good idea, the Israeli delegates that had arrived weeks before the event to kind of inspect the facilities and the areas and make sure security was okay, they're not so sure about this. Something's not kosher with them. They've been very security-minded for quite a while, starting mostly with the Six-Day War in 1967, where Israel is pretty much surrounded on all sides fighting for their survival as a nation. Also, a thing would happen with the USS Liberty. Look it up. We'll talk about it at some point in time. Hopefully, Mossad doesn't get my IP address. That would be unfortunate. More recently, the Israelis had been receiving threats from a Palestinian group calling themselves Black September. So, spoiler alert, we're talking about Israel and Palestine, which has not been a hot button issue since this happened. Nothing bad has ever happened between Israel and Palestine ever since then. Except for that one, or I don't know, like 150,000 events that have happened between then and now that they continue to just dislike each other. I say if they're going to continue to fight over it, we just give it back to the Romans, but that's just me. Anyway. The group named themselves after the Black September conflict, where the King of Jordan declared military rule over Palestine and had thousands of Palestinian soldiers killed. The Israeli team was supposed to be staying partly on the ground floor at the address of 31 Connolly Strasse, which the Israeli delegates immediately thought was a bad idea. They said the location was vulnerable and insecure. Tactically, like if you're trying to attack something, spoiler alert, a first floor room or building or anything like that, a lot easier than having to go up a set of stairs or try to pull a no Russian situation and come up in an elevator. So first floor, way easier, especially if you're going to do something like what we're about to talk about here, or say they wanted to do it differently and just, hose the building from a distance with rifles. Would have been a lot easier on the ground floor. The Israelis held meetings with members of the local police, security, and Olympic Committee members to voice their concerns. They were told the matter would be looked into, and of course, it wasn't. Why would it be? This is not just a failure on the part of the Germans and the Olympic Committee, but also on part of the Israelis. Got to give them some of the blame here as well. The Israeli Minister of Defense told the delegates to, quote, concern themselves with matters of sport and not with matters of security. Just go do your stuff. Go do your weightlifting. Don't worry about anybody trying to kill you. That's crazy to think about. Could have been like, hey, listen, you have a much higher chance of contracting an STD in the Olympic Village than you do of having a Palestinian terrorist group kill you there. Which, I mean, statistically is true. Because I could only imagine how many people in the Olympic Village are just, I mean, you've got athletes, you have these young, prime athletes in the prime of their lives from all over the world, and you just stick them together in one spot. People are going to do what people are going to do. Um, Now, there's been a series of recent events leading up to this, such as airplane hijackings, threats made, and attacks being carried out against Israelis. And there's been enough of them for them to take that as a legitimate threat. And not only are these threats being made against like Israeli people and the Israeli government, there's also threats that are being made elsewhere where the information is starting to roll into Mossad offices. Um, we'll talk about Mossad again next episode. And a lot of this information coming in that Mossad is picking up is about potential upcoming attacks somewhere in Europe. Germany's not specifically mentioned. Munich's not specifically mentioned. But with that being said, the Israeli Olympians moved into their quarters in the Olympic Village with no special security arrangements made for them. The Bavarian and German federal police were very nervous to present any openly armed security for fear of making people think that this is going to be like the Olympics were in 1936. As a matter of fact, the 2,000 Olympic security officials were given light blue uniforms and very little training. So they're very visible and very poorly trained on how to do anything. Basically, the training they're being given here is what you would give to like a crossing guard or somebody running security at a concert. Just like, hey, here's a shirt that says staff on it. If anybody gets into a fight, throw them out. We don't know what else to tell you. On Wednesday, August 23rd, 3 days before the opening ceremonies, a middle-aged couple from Palestine landed at the Cologne International Airport. After passing through customs, they wheeled 4 big suitcases out of the airport and rented a car. And I bet you're wondering why I brought this up. Well, it's because those suitcases were layered with women's underwear and lingerie and things like that. But underneath those, there's a pile. There's 8 AK-47s, several hundred rounds of ammo, and quite a few Soviet-made F-1 fragmentation grenades. Now, here's where they pull some James Bond. They drove 280 miles to Munich, stowed the bags in lockers at the Munich Central Railway Station. They dropped the keys for the lockers off with the concierge of a small hotel and told them in the next few days someone would be in to collect the keys. Just a few hours later, a member of Black September would stop by and pick the keys up. So just to get a little bit more background on Black September, they're a small branch of the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who we're also going to talk about again next episode. And an operating arm of Fatah, which is formerly the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. And like I said, I believe it was the Leopold episode, where I said if you put National Peoples or People's Liberation or any combination of those words together in a thing, it's probably going to be a terrorist group. Which the PNLM is a Palestinian nationalist political party and the largest faction of the Confederated Multi-Part Palestinian Liberation Organization and the second largest party in the Palestinian Legislative Council. One of the founding members of the PLO was Yasser Arafat, who, historically, giant dickhead. I feel like it's kind of important to explain a bit more about this group. The country of Jordan was created out of what was regarded for centuries as Palestinian land, and the Palestinians have a track record of getting themselves kicked out of places for being violent, like they did in Jordan, which is why they got kicked out of here. So the British Empire created Jordan as a reward to the Saudi ruling dynasty. Black September was one of the names of the military operation by the Jordanians to clear out Palestinian influence and armed elements between September of 1970 and July of 1971. the PLO leadership was pushed completely out of Jordan. Now that we've digressed, I don't know what the word for that is. Let's get back on track. Because we're in Germany and they know a thing or two about getting things on track. Today, September 5th, 1972, we're now 9 days into the Olympic Games. A private bus full of Israeli athletes was driving back to the Olympic Village from downtown Munich, having seen a performance of I Swear to God, Fiddler on the Roof, which is like, you couldn't have picked a more stereotypically Jewish play to go watch. Everyone's pretty relaxed as the bus enters gate 25A. And again, there's no real security at the gate because there's no real security anywhere. The only people here are like basically two rent-a-cops, and they're pretty lax in checking passes and doing their jobs. As all this is going on, 8 Black September operatives are traveling in pairs to a meeting point at Munich Central Station. They met at the cafe and the train station, and only when all of them had arrived were the full actual plans laid out for what they're about to do. Plan's pretty simple. Take Israeli hostages at the Olympic Village, hold them until 200 Palestinian political prisoners who are being held in Israel are released. So this is going to be a pretty standard hostage situation. We're going to snatch these guys up, hold on to them until our guys get released. And if they don't release our guys, we're kind of going to do what we would do in a hostage situation. Very similar to the Operation Nimrod episode. Except instead of having the SAS show up, we have guys with those like glowy wands to like direct traffic, basically, is the equivalent of the rescue team for these guys. Hostages and prisoners would then be flown to a Palestinian-friendly Arab state where the hostages would be released. It was agreed upon that no harm would be done to the hostages. Right? This is where I want to jump in and make a personal observation. I don't think that even if this plan had gone smoothly, that the hostages would have actually been released unharmed. It's just kind of what they do. It's what terrorist organizations do. We're going to make demands. We're going to wait and see if our demands are met. If they aren't, we're going to kill these guys. If they are, we may still kill these guys because they're not ours. You know what I mean? Bit of a gray area. Because again, in the long run, this is not about the 200 political prisoners. This is about Palestine wanting to retake the land that was theirs. The whole, you hear people yelling, the whole like river to the sea thing, which, whatever, I get you have the right to protest and that's fine. But realistically, most of the people that are out there protesting things have no idea what they're even there for. They're just there because it's the new thing. So the Black September members were all handpicked and trained specifically for this operations. I've got the names of these guys. I usually wouldn't give the names of people like this out. I tried not to with the Operation Nimrod episode, but there's not that many guys. I may as well just do it. We have the brother team of Jamal and Adnan Al-Jishi, Mohammed Safadi, Khalid Jawad, Jesus, Ahmad Sheikh Ta, awful name, and Afif Ahmed Hamid. These men have been trained in Libya at the World Revolutionary Center, which is a training camp owned and funded by Muammar Gaddafi, shocker, who he may end up coming up again sometime in this season in a place that you would not expect it. Let's put it that way. Definitely not somewhere where you would expect to see a mural of Muammar Gaddafi. Just saying. When I first found out about it, I was like, oh, wait, what? why is his face there? That's crazy. After training was completed, the men were sent to Germany weeks, even months before the games began, so that they could assimilate into local populations and familiarize themselves with the area. The group was led by a Palestinian named Muhammad Masala, which I believe is a chicken dish, who spoke fluent German and chose to go by the name of Isa for the mission. Isa is Arabic for Jesus, which, whatever, dude. Anyway, a 25-year-old Jordanian Palestinian named Youssef Nazal, which that sounds like a desert genie or a jinn of some sort, who's well-educated and very radicalized. He's the other leader of this, and he went by the very Arab-sounding Tony for some weird reason. So Issa and Tony were the only two members of this entire hit team that have actually been given details beforehand, which is a very smart thing to do, because if you give these two dudes the information and they get there separately, if one of them stopped, probably not going to talk to any authority figure about it. Like if they get picked up by the cops or somebody like that, they're not going to talk. If you send the information to everybody and they come in as a group, it's more obvious that there's a lot of guys that are, it's going to sound bad, a lot of these guys that look the same and they're all together, which is going to raise a little bit more suspicion than it would just onesies, twosies here and there. And the more people you tell, the more opportunities there are to get information. In the immortal words of Benjamin Franklin, the secret is not truly safe when more than one person knows it, as each additional person increases the likelihood of it being revealed. Black September's secret weapon was the sleeper cells that they had in Germany. The cells were made up of mainly students who conducted detailed recon of the Olympic Village, and they gave the operatives most of the intel that they would actually need to do anything. The soon-to-be hostage takers familiarized themselves with each other and with the Olympic Village in general and the surrounding area. They decided that H hour would be set for midnight, September 4th, 1972. Shortly before midnight on the 4th, the men broke off into two groups of four and collected the weapons bags from the railway station. After collecting the weapons, they dressed in training suits to blend in with the athletes and rode in two separate cabs to the Olympic Village. At around 4 a.m., the men scaled the fence near Gate 25A, which is where the Israeli bus had come back through, and the quote-unquote guards thought that they had just been athletes returning after a night on the town. They didn't even stop these guys to talk to them. They just went, that's weird. They're probably just guys coming back from having a couple of beers, right? Yeah, that sounds about right. This whole thing is stupid. It all could have been avoided. Could have been avoided if Germany wasn't trying to look good. They could have just done their jobs and provided security, and this whole thing would have stopped. All it would have taken is one dingus to unzip a suitcase and go, oh, hey, these aren't underwear. These are rifles. Maybe we don't let these particular guys in, right? I don't know. Hindsight and whatnot, I guess. So they didn't rouse any suspicion, and they even helped a group of drunk American athletes get back to the village as well. The Palestinians in their athletic gear look just like they should be there. They'd switched the rifles into an Olympic official duffel bag. So just this giant bags with the Olympic rings on them, and, because that looks less suspicious than dudes coming over the fence with suitcases, I guess. All that being said, there are still reports that they had been observed by 6 postal workers. So this group of postal workers saw this group of guys, and they're like, that's kind of suspicious. And they went to the local authorities and told them, and the report was not taken seriously and never followed up on. If it had been, I wouldn't be doing this episode. I'd be doing an episode about the attempted attack and kidnapping of Israeli athletes at the Olympics. They approached 31 Connolly Strasse where the Israeli athletes are sleeping. They removed the AKs, loaded them, and ducked into the shadows. Shortly after 4:10 a.m., they got to the front door of apartment 1, which was the lower floor unit. One of the men had a spare key that had been made. The key was not like a true copy because it couldn't unlock the door right away. Unknown who gave him the key, probably one of their contacts. And at this point, this is very possible that this copy may have been a handmade key, because a lot of the times you can actually you can do that, I should say. You can like press a key into clay to get the impression, and then you can take a piece of metal or like even a key blank and copy the teeth, like the teeth pattern on the key. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Why? I don't know how hard it would have been to have a key cut in 1972. I can tell you that having a key cut in 2025 at Home Depot is so impossible that the company I work for actually bought us a key machine. So we cut our own. The sound of the key in the lock woke up Josef Gutfreund, a burly 40-year-old wrestling referee. He approached the door barefoot and in his underwear, and just as he got to the door, it opened and he saw the most recognizable rifle in the world and realized something awful is about to happen. He hurled his bulk at the door, shouting out warnings to the others in the house. His yelling woke up Tuvia Sokolovsky, who was a weightlifting trainer, who leapt out of bed and started shouting to wake the others as he hurtled towards the back door. So we've got one guy, one giant man holding the front door, and we now have another giant man headed towards the back door. That Sokolovsky, that's spelled with the SKY, meaning that this guy's Russian and a weightlifter. So he's probably roughly the size of a house. So Tuvia is headed to the back, like the back entrance. And he's yelling for everybody to follow him. He punches a window out to try to escape and didn't take time to unlock the door or to be like, hey, maybe we didn't lock it when we came back from Fiddler. Hulk smashes this window. And as that happens, the Palestinians then flood through the front door. They overpower Gutfreund as Sokolovsky is trying to escape. One of the Palestinians pulls up and just rips like a half a magazine at him. He takes cover behind a building. Back in the apartment, the remaining 6 Israeli athletes woke up to armed men dressed in tracksuits and balaclavas ordering them out of bed, which has got to be just like the weirdest fever dream I could imagine, especially like 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I'm sure these guys are probably used to getting up fairly early because they're like athletes and they're training at all hours, but who knows? You know, maybe the Manischewitz was flowing when when they were down to Fiddler and Fiddler on the Roof. And maybe they had a couple, they tied a couple on, and you're planning on sleeping in. You're going to get up like 6:30, not 10 after 4 with a rifle in your face. The hostages were then herded into a second floor bedroom where they were tied up with pre-cut lengths of rope and forced onto the beds. So unfortunately, these Palestinian terrorists are very well prepared. The 6 hostages were Josef Gutfreund, the guy from the front door, the track and field coach, Mitzer Shapira, who was 40, marksmanship coach Kehat Shore, which, man, that's unfortunate. You have a marksmanship coach there and no guns. This could have turned things around a little bit. 53. Andrea Spitzer, the 27-year-old fencing coach. I mean, shit, if you had a sword there, you could have turned something around a little bit. Yakov Springer, who is a 50-year-old weightlifting referee, and this might be the most Jewish name that I've ever heard. Moshe Weinberg, who's a 33-year-old wrestling coach. So you really think about it, you have all these like combat event coaches and athletes. and they couldn't do anything. Weinberg, who had just gotten back to the apartment after a night out, kind of still had his wits about him. He dove at Issa and knocked him on his ass, which is good. Before Weinberg could get hold of the weapon, he shot through the cheek, which, ow. The wound is awful, but it's not life-threatening. Because honestly, your cheeks, there's not a lot there. And if it goes through, other than, blowing your teeth out, if it goes straight through, it's going to bleed like crazy, right? But there's not a lot of real important stuff there. Better than getting shot like directly in the mouth, where it would potentially go through and hit your brainstem and just turn the lights off. This will suck. It's going to hurt like hell, but it won't kill you immediately. Issa and 2 others stood watch as Tony and 4 others took Weinberg upstairs at gunpoint to find more Israelis. They forced Weinberg through the door of apartment 3. So the way this apartment works, I think, is you have the ground floor, and then I think the access points to the upper apartments are all indoors. I don't think there's any outdoor, any outdoor access points. I think that's all done from inside. So you got to kind of think about being woken up with a door being kicked in and seeing your friends bleeding profusely from the face, and then a handful of just dudes in balaclavas coming through. That's got to be sobering. Very, very quick wake-up call. Apartment 3 is where the gunman found the following athletes. David Berger, a 28-year-old American-born weightlifter. Elizer Halfin, a 24-year-old Soviet-born wrestler. Mark Salvin, an 18-year-old Greco-Roman wrestler. He's not Greek and Roman. Greco-Roman's the style of wrestling. It would be cooler if he was a professional wrestler, just like DDT is one of these guys. Yosef Romano, a 32-year-old Libyan-born powerlifter. Zayev Friedman, who's a 28-year-old Polish-born weightlifter. And Gad Saberi, who's a 28-year-old freestyle wrestler. The men were marched, confused, and still half asleep at gunpoint downstairs to the first apartment to join the rest of the team. While the gunmen were forcing them downstairs, Gad Saberi made a break for it, running in a zigzag through the parking garage, and he actually managed to escape. While the Palestinians had been distracted by Zabari's escape, Moji Weinberg took the opportunity to try and wrestle a gun away again. There's a burst of automatic fire, and Weinberg hit the floor dead immediately. So that sucks. But at the same time, you got to do something. Because you don't know what the hell these guys want. They have not made their intentions clear yet. They just kind of rolled into your house with guns, and you got to do something, It's probably better to go out fighting than it would be to, potentially be tortured. Because again, at this point, you have no idea what the hell these guys want. The sounds of gunfire woke the rest of the complex, and the remaining 5 Israelis were shoved into the apartment, and the door was closed behind them. At this point in time, from first contact with the Israeli team to herding the still living members into the apartment, less than 10 minutes have passed. Considering you're clearing 2 small apartments and you have 8 dudes with AKs, and you have a pretty good idea of the layout of the buildings because you have people that have been gathering information about all this stuff, 10 minutes is pretty sloppy. Listen, I'm not a terrorist or like a high-speed combat dude or anything, but 10 minutes seems like a long time. Seems pretty sloppy to me. A few moments after the door slammed shut, an Olympic steward armed with only a walkie-talkie approached the area after getting reports of gunfire. He turned the corner and was confronted by the dead body of Weinberg splayed on the sidewalk, and he spoke rapidly into his radio and rushed away from what was probably the most horrifying thing he had ever seen. Because, first of all, stumbling across a dead body, even if it's somebody that just, conked over from a heart attack or something and you're not expecting it, probably pretty scary. I unfortunately work in a business where I was told on my first day, it's not if you find someone dead, it's when you find someone dead. So yeah, that would be kind of a moment, and then the fact that this guy is just full of 7.62 holes, which 7.62 will leave a pretty substantial exit wound on a human body from videos I've seen, because the internet is a terrifying and disgusting place. Anyway, Yusuf Romano, who had suffered a torn knee ligament and was using crutches, made what would be the last attempt by one of the athletes to fight back. Romano launched himself from his crutches at one of the masked men, trying to get the AK away from him. Committing his final act of bravery, he was killed trying to defend himself and his fellow countrymen. Again, go out fighting. That's the way to do it. By this point, the entire Olympic Village has been awoken by gunfire, and telephones begin ringing all over the city of Munich and all over the world as athletes tried to contact the authorities and people in their respective countries. Again, AKs, they're loud, especially full auto. Because I highly doubt that any of these dillweeds had the thought to be like, hey, let's try to get suppressors and do this sneaky quiet, which suppressors don't make them all that quiet. It just makes it so you don't need ear pro when you shoot them, basically. Kind of just takes that crack out of it with the initial shot. Also, if you're a law-abiding citizen in the United States, they are damn near impossible to acquire legally. Because people in Washington have watched too many movies and they think that it makes them into like a... Anyway, I won't start talking about gun laws and my feelings on the ATF. Not yet, at least. Because eventually, we're going to have to do a couple episodes where we talk about the ATF and how I feel about them. The first phone call that was answered was that of Munich Police Chief Manfred Schreiber at 5 a.m. He then contacted Bruno Merck, the Bavarian Interior Minister, who then called the German Interior Minister, Hans Dietrich Genscher. I probably could have just read those names and not told you they were German, and you would have figured or assumed correctly that they were. Genscher made a series of strategically placed calls to government officials, and before too long, the phone rang in the office of Moshe Dayan, the Israeli Defense Minister. At 5:30 a.m., the phone in the bedroom of Golda Meir, who is the Israeli Prime Minister, rang. And just after 5:30, the Munich police reached the sidewalk where Moshe Weinberg lay dead. They scooped him up and rushed him back to an ambulance to be taken to a local hospital to see if there was anything they could do for him. Telexes began coming in across the world, and one reached the offices of ABC, who had the television rights to the Olympics. And I think no, they don't, because they were on Peacock last time I watched them, which is NBC. Anyway. Sports reporter Jim McKay had the sobering task of reporting, quote, "The Olympics of Serenity have become the one thing the Germans didn't want them to be, the Olympics of Terror." Now let's get into the standoff. Manfred Schreiber would say, quote, "Some people say the police mistakes caused the deaths of the hostages, but it was the other way around. The hostages died because the terrorists made no mistakes." Way to take absolutely zero accountability or responsibility for making sure that you didn't have any security there because you didn't want people to think that they had, like, the Gestapo walking around like they did in 1936. The amount of butt covering that the Germans have done since World War II to make people not think that they're the bad guys is incredible. You could just start by saying, listen, he wasn't even German, he was Austrian, and pin it all on them, right? But you don't. You just get super soft about stuff and be like, oh, well, it's not really our fault. We're just trying to be good and nice and not make people think that we're bad guys. Shut the up. Do your job. Security is important at things like this. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. The first sign of willingness to communicate from Black September was a 2-page typewritten script that was dropped by one of the masked men from the balcony to responders. The script had the name of 236 prisoners they wanted released, 234 of which were being held in Israeli prisons. Among the names listed were Kozo Akamoto, who was a Japanese terrorist that had attacked passengers at Lod Airport. Two others specifically named were Ulrich Meinhof and Andres Bader, the founding members of the Red Army faction, who are being held in West German prisons. So, realistically, these are probably the two guys that they could have gotten released with any kind of ease. The terrorists had set the deadline for the release for 9 a.m. This was 3 hours from the time the letters hit police hands. 3 hours is pretty tight to try to get something like that done in. At 8:45, Schreiber and Walter Troger being the mayor of the Olympic Village, which I didn't realize that you had to elect a mayor for the Olympic Village. I would have just thought that that's a pretty a pretty weird thing to do, but whatever. Anyway, they make their way to Connolly Strauss. With them was Ahmed El Dermadish Tony, the Egyptian delegate to the International Olympic Committee. This guy was reluctant to be part of the situation, but as an Arabic speaker, he was the only one that could speak to Isa in his native language. Because, believe it or not, Egypt, not a huge fan of Israel or Palestine. Hence the more modern times, where after the October 7th thing happened, and all the Palestinian refugees were trying to go to Egypt, and Egypt's like, nah, we're good. And they put fences up at the borders to keep them out. They also have a history of kicking Palestinians out of their country. And there's this neat book called The Bible, which kind of talks about, in some parts of it, how the Egyptians felt about Jews. I'm assuming things haven't changed all that much since then. Anyway, what they didn't know was that Isa was completely fluent in German. And after the initial conversations had been had, they send this Tooney fella back to his hotel because they're like, we got this. You can go back to twirling your mustache or whatever the hell you were doing beforehand. I don't know if he had a mustache. I just always pictured Egyptian dudes with mustaches. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a little racist. Who knows? You know who's headed for too good for too long? The Egyptians. That's who. Sure. During the opening conversation in Arabic, Tooney made the request that the impossible deadline be moved. Isa now understood that the deadline was unreachable, and he decided that it could be extended to noon, which would give them like an extra 3 or 6 hours, something like that. Schreiber, for a very, very quick second, had the thought of trying to rush Isa and take him captive to use him as a negotiation piece, which I think we know how that would have ended with a dead German. He realized quickly that these men would never have negotiated for his release. They were loyal to the idea, not to each other. He then offered Isa and his men an unlimited sum of cash, and Isa responded by spitting on the ground, showing that he was insulted by the offer of money. Because again, they're not here for money. They're here for their people and to kill Israelis. I am here to chew halal bubblegum and kill Israelis, and I am all out of halal bubblegum. As negotiations continued, the authorities, local and federal, started to realize how ill-prepared they were for a situation like this, because they had put zero preparation into security in the first place. They didn't have any idea where to start. So reports say they didn't even have blueprints for the building the terrorists were holed up in. We don't know what the inside of the building looks like. That's pretty badly prepared. Even these guys had those. The most mind-blowing thing for me is the fact that they showed no interest at all in any outside help, especially from Israel. The Israelis had skilled, professional, and more importantly, experienced people that could help with negotiations, and if need be, they could offer a military rescue. ADD break. So just for a laugh, it's a 3-hour, 45-minute flight from Tel Aviv to Munich. Pretty sure They could have, if they were informed from the very beginning and said, hey, we may need your help at 4:00 in the morning, they probably could have had a crew of Mossad dudes or IDF guys, like special forces, whatever, on a plane in there in less than that. And they probably would have just gone in, kicked the doors in, put bullets in these guys, and called it a day. They would have collected their dead. They would have gone home. But the Germans were being stubborn and they didn't want help. This entire situation pisses me off because none of these countries are doing the right thing. Anyway, Troger spoke at length with Issa and found out the situation the terrorists were in. Issa told him, quote, either way, we are dead. Either we will be killed here, or if we go out and give up without having hostages, we will be killed where we go. This, again, not something anybody was prepared for. The ideal plan for the Germans would be for the Israelis to release the prisoners and have the hostages released, and for all these to be loaded onto a plane and away from the Olympics so that the games can continue. Because that's what's important here, is making sure that ABC doesn't lose money and the Olympics get to continue happening. Golda Meir and the Israeli government had the experience and understanding of how the minds of terrorists worked. They realized that if they gave in to these Palestinian demands, it would only encourage future attacks. If you give a Palestinian a cookie, he's going to want to go kill more Jews. Needless to say, the Israelis refused to even consider negotiating with the Palestinian terrorists. The Israelis' only demand was that the Olympic Games be suspended until the situation could be handled. The Germans and the Olympic Committee, on the other hand, decided that's not going to happen. Again, this is all incredibly smooth-brained activity. They just want you to not run the Olympics until they can get their people back. And you're like, ha ha ha, ha, no, we have a TV schedule to keep. Well, 9 Israeli athletes were being held at gunpoint. The volleyball finals were being played between Japan and West Germany. Obviously, the priority is for 2 countries that I don't immediately think about when I think about volleyball to see who gets a gold medal. Eventually, Israel applied enough pressure that the Olympic Committee agreed to put a hold on the games long enough to hold a memorial for the 2 athletes that had been killed. In Israel, an emergency cabinet meeting was being held where it was agreed that the Israeli ambassador to West Germany, Eliashiv Ben-Horon, which I got a 0% interest loan when I said that name, would explain Israel's position to the German authorities in Berlin. Israel would not bargain with the terrorists, and the only acceptable outcome was the release of the remaining hostages and the arrest of the bad guys. The Israelis made the decision that if the hostages were released, they would consider releasing the Black September prisoners, and the Israelis made it clear that it was expected that the Germans would do anything in their power to make sure the athletes were released safely, except delay the volleyball finals. Ben-Horon arrived at the Olympic Village at 11 a.m., which is an hour before the deadline. Diplomatic channels stayed open through the entire situation, even though Ben-Horon was very cold when delivering the terms to the Germans. There were some more in-depth behind-the-scenes talks going on between German Chancellor Willy Brandt and Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. Meir was not afraid to point a finger at the lax German security arrangements, which the Germans acknowledged and somewhat begrudgingly agreed was... they agreed with the assessment, let's put it that way. Meir also insisted more than once that the Germans allow an Israeli tactical team to assist in the rescue operation. The German chancellor thanked her, but declined the offer. She kept telling them that their people had more experience with these kinds of situations, and that since the hostages were Israeli, she should have some right to get involved. Which, yeah, I guess. Because, honestly, had this been an American team taken hostage, We would have had Green Berets cutting through the roof within an hour of that happening. Had it been Brits, the SAS would have been there. Just saying. I mean, had it been Germans, GSG-9 would have been there, kicking doors in, shooting bad guys. But for some reason, they're like, nah, we got this. Which, spoiler alert, they don't got this. So just to put it this way, just because the Germans refused help didn't mean they had it all figured out. They still have no idea how to handle this entire situation that's getting more and more delicate as we go through it. Germany had a very convoluted rule on the books at the time. I'm not 100% sure if it's still in effect or not, where deploying any federal armed forces into a state without invitation was strictly prohibited. Because each state was sovereign, meaning that the crisis could only be handled by authorities in said state. So in this case, Bavaria. This meant that the amount of help that could be offered from the federal side was dependent on the willingness of the local government to accept it. So that'd be kind of, I mean, that's such a weird situation. That'd be like, say there was, I don't know, say there's a terrorist attack in California, right? That would be like them refusing to let federal troops come in to handle it because they have the state police there. You know what I mean? It's a really dumb rule, I think, especially for a situation like this where help from like actual like military or like some badass special forces dudes would have ended this situation almost immediately. But because you have to get permission from the state that it's taking place in, you can't do anything. And the Bavarians obviously refused to help. We can handle this. You can't. So just to recap, the Israelis have offered to help the Germans. The Germans refused. The German federal government offered to help the Bavarians, and the Bavarians refused. I don't know if it's a pissing contest or what, but people's lives are at stake. And bureaucracy is doing what bureaucracy does, and that's to get in its own way half the time. At 31 Connolly Strauss, officials jockeyed for position of control, and the situation grew more and more tense as the hostage takers are starting to get a little antsy because they've been awake for like almost 24 hours at this point. Issa was growing more irritated and eventually agreed to extend the deadline to 5 p.m. after being told that bureaucratic issues across multiple time zones were making it difficult to arrange the transfer of information. This is a time before internet, so all this stuff is being done through telex machines or phone calls. So as minutes are falling off the clock, the Germans are simply buying time for the sake of buying time. No prisoners had been scheduled for transfer or exchange, and they still had no plan how to do this. At 4:35, with less than 30 minutes left of the deadline, a noticeably more agitated Issa changes the demands. This is a relief to Schreiber and Troger and Merck because it bought them even more time. They didn't realize what the demands were going to be, though. Issa and his fellow Palestinians demanded that they and the hostages be flown to Egypt, where they would meet with the Palestinian prisoners that the Israelis were supposed to release, and they would make an exchange of hostages for prisoners there. The Germans loved this idea because that took all of this off their hands. They can just wash their hands and walk away because now it's some other country's problem that they can deal with, and the Olympics can get back underway as scheduled. Because again, that's the priority here. Not trying to save people's lives. It's about making sure that, whatever event starts on time. Genscher, however, insisted that he inspect the condition of the hostages before they make any arrangements, okay? For all the shortcomings and honestly laziness, that was a pretty ballsy thing for a negotiator to do. He and Troger were allowed into the apartment. The two men were shocked to see the state of the 9 men with their hands and feet bound, bloodied and bruised. Then their eyes fall into the corner where Joseph Romano was laying in a congealed pool of blood. The two negotiators left, having determined the remaining hostages have no life-threatening injuries. So, we're good, right? So as all this is going on, well, these guys are still in there. There's some talk kind of like in back rooms about a possible tactical rescue. One idea was to disguise 2 policemen as chefs to storm the apartment while delivering food. You imagine, like, that'd be the modern equivalent of that would be like, what if we sent 2 DoorDash guys, right? And then they open the door and they're like, why is there 2 of you? And they're like, because he's training, we're the police, you know? That is the stupidest idea. The dumbest thing, like, you may as well have been like, hey, we're going to put like a cartoon turkey on a wheelie cart, and we're going to stuff an entire SWAT team in the bottom of the cart and then put a tablecloth over it to disguise them, and we'll just wheel it in Trojan horse style. This idea probably realistically would have resulted in the deaths of everyone in that room, including the police. Another plan, which people watched play out live on international TV, showed 12 local policemen, some of which were not overly skilled with firearms, because again, this is Europe. And more specifically, it's Germany, where Germans did a bad thing in the 30s and 40s. And then we, as a collective of countries, informed them of the mistake that they have made. And we provided corrective action. And then decided that they couldn't have guns in a military anymore. And then, no offense, but Europeans got soft and went, we don't really need guns. You guys can just take them. And then when we get attacked by terrorists or whatever, we'll just send the police out with sticks. It is what it is, right? Which is why, as Americans, we shouldn't give up our guns. My thoughts as a Second Amendment enthusiast, let's put it that way. Anyway, so these guys that lack any kind of skill with firearms are deployed onto the roof of the apartment block and were ordered to burst in through air ducts and windows. So we're going to die hard this thing. Actually, probably a better description of how this would have worked would have been for anybody that's seen Boondock Saints, the scene where they go in to try to kill that was it like Bosnian mob boss or whatever. They're crawling through the ducts and they fall through, and because one of them insisted on bringing rope, they get caught and they're just dangling from the ceiling. God, that's a great movie. I haven't thought about Boondock Saints in so long. Oh man, I might have to watch that again. Anyway, so this plan works really well because when the Palestinians saw the police deployment on the TV in the apartment, they ordered the police to remove the team from the roof or the hostages would be executed at 6 p.m. I don't know why they would have thought that these guys wouldn't have turned a TV on to see if there was any news coverage of this. That is wild. What Genscher and Troger had discovered during their visit was what they thought was a accurate number of Palestinians involved. The Germans originally thought there was 4 gunmen. After the visit, that number was revised to 5 because they went into the building, they met with the hostages, and they saw 5 guys in balaclavas with guns. There's still 3 men that the Germans have no idea are there. So with this new information, the Germans begin to set up an operation at the airport. The Germans decided to handle the situation on the ground at the airport before the terrorists could board the plane. So now we have a spot where we can tactically set people up where we know the terrain, we have a good idea of the layout, and once we get these guys here, we can kill them, get the hostages back. Good plan. If I remember correctly, I played this map on Rainbow Six Rogue Spear, which, if you remember playing that game, your knees hurt when you wake up. That was a classic. Oh my God. Such a good game. Anyway, so like I said before, the Germans are cool with letting them go and letting another country handle it, but they decided if they went that route after refusing help from Israel, it would basically be just sending these hostages to their deaths. A decision was made that the terrorists and hostages would be moved to, oh no, the Frunzenfeldbruck military airfield, which is north of Munich. And yes, the oh no was because I had to try to pronounce that. Oh my God, what a word. Germany. Fürstenfeldbruck? Maybe I'm not saying it right. Fürstenfeldbruck. No, that didn't feel right either. Anyway, at the airfield, there would be 2 police teams waiting in ambush points to wipe out the Palestinians. The first team would be dressed as flight attendants aboard the Lufthansa Boeing 727, where they would ambush Tony and Issa as they boarded the plane. Why do we have to have disguises? I don't understand the Germans' obsession with, like, did they have a budget for costumes? Like, we have to make sure we have to get 2 people, right? We have enough money for 2 costumes. Either way we go, they can be chefs or flight attendants, but we have the money to do 2 costumes. So we have to pick 2 people. And then we have to use this idea of having people in costumes. Just send badasses in camouflage out there to shoot these guys. It's not that hard. Like, I'm stupid. I am not a tactical genius. I was never in the military or in law enforcement. I could have planned how to do this with like a whiteboard and a couple of dudes with rifles. But no. Costumes. Anyway, this episode's pissing me off. Oh, the stupidity. The Germans assumed that Tony and Issa would want to inspect the plane before leaving, so the police dressed as flight attendants would take Tony and Issa out, as the second team, made up of 5 sharpshooters, would take the remaining terrorists out on the tarmac and then free the hostages. Or we could have skipped the costume budget, added another guy, right? And had 2 tactical teams of 4 just hit these guys when they got off the bus. Oh, God. I want to bang my head against stuff, thinking about how badly this whole thing was bungled from the beginning to the end. So back at the Olympic Village, the question still remained, how would the terrorists and hostages be transported to the airfield? Issa and Tony came to an agreement and told negotiators that they wanted a bus. We can do a bus. The negotiators told them that couldn't happen because the streets were choked with people and vehicles. So they made the counteroffer of getting helicopters. Oh, God. Now completely exhausted and beginning to lose trust of the negotiators, Issa caved and agreed to take the helicopter rides. When he was told that the helicopters would be arriving soon, he inspected the route to them and decided it was still too dangerous for his people and demanded a bus take them from the apartment to the landing zone. Shortly after 10 p.m., the first bound and blindfolded hostages appeared at the door, with the masked gunmen following. When they arrived at the helicopters, Tony took 4 of the hostages and boarded the first helo with 3 other Palestinians. Issa took the remaining 5 hostages and the remaining Palestinians on his. The press kept their distance, but the men moving around the helicopters were illuminated by thousands of camera flashes. Which, if they had been muzzle flashes, this whole thing would have been settled. But I mean, I guess it wouldn't be the proper thing to do to uh, shoot these guys in front of people. I guess. I mean, after the helos of the terrorists and hostages took off, another helo landed to pick up senior federal and Brazilian. So they're half Brazilian, half Bavarian. Which, I mean, there's some people out there like that, but landed to pick up senior federal and Bavarian officials along with the members of the Israeli intelligence department. This helicopter flew directly to the airfield, while the first two flew in a wider route to make sure the third helicopter could land first and everyone could kind of get into position. Just as planned, when Tony and Issa's helicopters touched down, the two rushed to the 727. Since nothing has gone according to plan thus far, let's not change that. The security team that was supposed to be on the plane waiting to ambush Issa and Tony had taken off just minutes before the helicopter landed, thinking the operation had been so quickly and sloppily put together that the terrorist would see what was going on and just flat out kill them. Oh my God. How this whole thing was so poorly put together that the police operators involved were allowed to just leave is shocking. The guys involved with this had so little faith that this would work that they just went home. They went and got a sausage or something and were like, this is a stupid idea. This isn't going to work. We're going to go get coffee. Issa and Tony entered the cold, quiet, and incredibly empty plane, and suspecting a trap, immediately retreated from the aircraft. Now, the two sharpshooters, and I use that term very loosely, didn't know of any of the changes to the mission in the plane. The reason I use the term sharpshooters loosely is because none of them were trained snipers. Matter of fact, the only reason these guys were selected is because they were the only ones that had any basic experience with firearms. They were told to expect 5 targets, and yet there are 8 bad guys on the tarmac. The sharpshooter team still thought that they had guys in the plane. They didn't know they had left yet. At 10:40 p.m., the commander of the police force at the airfield ordered 2 of the marksmen to open fire. Only one Palestinian was hit, and the other took cover under the helicopter and started returning fire with long bursts towards the sniper nest. And the only shot that landed hit Tony in the foot and dropped into the tarmac, while Issa ran a serpentine in the direction of the control tower and fired short, controlled bursts from his AK. For a few moments, fire erupted from the area of the helicopters. The lights that were illuminating that area of the tarmac were shot out by the terrorists, which made it impossible for the snipers to distinguish between good guys and bad guys. In the chaos, a German police officer was shot in the head by a stray round, and it's still unclear whether it was a terrorist round or a police round that hit him. The term FUBAR would apply here for the entire thing. 20 minutes of silence followed, which led the police to believe the terrorists were saving their ammo. And so at this point here, the Israeli secret servicemen that are on site tried to take control and tried to take the fight to the Palestinians. But none of the German officers would follow them into the fight. The only assistance that the Germans would offer was to get armored vehicles, but they had no ETA on them. They had no idea when they would be there. They didn't tell the Israelis that the vehicles are stuck in traffic. This whole thing went pear-shaped from the jump. As the Germans sat on their hands being indecisive, a line of headlights cut through the darkness of the tarmac. When the Palestinians saw the armored vehicles approaching, they realized that the tides had turned and began their end-run strategy. One of the terrorists removed a Russian-made fragmentation grenade, pulled the pin, and tossed it onto the floor of the helicopter. When the grenade exploded, it ignited the fuel tanks and tore into the hostages. The 4 hostages killed in this explosion were Zeev Friedman, Eliezer Halfin, David Berger, and Yakov Springer. This is just incredible that any of this took place in the first place. Moments later, the Palestinian that had taken cover under the other helicopter climbed out from underneath it, shouldered his rifle, and unleashed one long, full automatic burst, killing the hostages inside. They were Yusef Gutfreund, Kahat Shor, Mark Salvin, Amitzer Shapira, and Andrea Spitzer. So, because the German authorities were stubborn and pig-headed and refused any kind of help, all of the hostages are dead. But I guess the good news is, now we can just shoot whoever's moving. And the other thing to remember here is, all of these hostages are still hogtied in the helicopters. They had no opportunity to fight. They were tied into the seats. Zero chance to defend themselves. The remaining Palestinians split up and ran in different directions, firing short, controlled bursts as they went. As they ran, Issa was taken out with a single gunshot. Surprisingly, somebody had good aim here and killed this guy with one shot. Adnan and Jamal Al-Jishi and Mohammed Safadi escaped into an open field along the runway. The German police gave chase in an armored vehicle and on foot with dogs. The chase lasted over an hour before the men were finally run to ground. 3 of the remaining men were laying on the tarmac and faking being dead, and they were quickly arrested. Tony escaped the initial gunfight, but he was tracked down by police dogs around 40 minutes later. The police cornered him in a parking lot on the airbase. They fired tear gas canisters at him. Most likely CS gas is what they used. And the effects of CS gas are watering eyes, uncontrollable running nose, vomiting, and in some cases, the feel of a severe sunburn and direct skin contact. Ask your doctor if CS gas is right for you. Which, I mean, the Germans don't exactly have a great record with gas. For these guys, it was probably lucky that it wasn't a little bit stronger than CS gas, because I bet they still had some of that floating around somewhere. And we'll talk about the guy that was responsible for all that bullshit in a later episode. After the gas canisters had taken effect, a short gunfight took place where Tony was killed. At 1:30 a.m. on September 6, 1972, the ordeal came to an end. Almost the entire Israeli team has been killed in cold blood. All of the Palestinian terrorists have either been killed or captured, including the leaders of the group, Issa and Tony, who were both among the dead. Now, this is where this part of the story ends. The story isn't over yet, but this chapter is. When I come back next time, we're going to come to a conclusion with this whole thing. Because now, after the Germans did nothing, the Israelis are about to do a whole lot. We'll come back next time and talk about Operation Wrath of God, which is a pretty appropriate name for what they're about to do. Oh boy. Now, sorry if that episode bothered anybody because of, all the current events and all the nonsense that's constantly going on in the Middle East. I find it to be a very interesting topic, because had the report from the mail carriers been even taken seriously, even looked into a little bit, none of this would have happened. Had the Germans not gotten super soft about showing any kind of police presence or military force for an event like this never would have happened. But because they're trying to make amends for past wrongs, it costs lives. Such a stupid situation. None of it makes any sense to me why this. I mean, I understand why it happened in the first place because terrorists are going to do terrorist things, but the complete lack of preparation or security or anything like that is mind-boggling. This couldn't happen today because of how tight security is everywhere for events like this. Because honestly, because of events like this, where we've seen it happen in the past, so now we have to account for it in the future. Which it sucks. It sucks that we have to do things like that, where we have to have snipers on buildings for large events like this because they are targets for terrorist attacks. But it's a little bit of effort. A little bit of effort could have stopped this. A little bit of effort could have prevented this. But they put none in. And then when you're offered help to go, nah, we got it. When you have no plan on how to fix it in the first place, is disgusting. You had a country that was willing to send like the best that they can muster militarily to protect the best that they could have mustered athletically. And you said no, because you wanted to take care of it yourself. You didn't want to interrupt the flow of the Olympic Games. You didn't want to ruin TV schedules. You want to lose any of that money that ABC was dishing out for the TV stuff. You didn't want to ruin your chances of maybe having the Olympics there again. It's frustrating how stupid this was and how poorly it was handled. And I mean, I shouldn't be more upset with the German authorities than I am with the terrorists, but I am, because I understand why these guys were doing what they were doing, because it's in their mindset, it's their plan, it's part of their organization to do stuff like this. The German government should have been trying to prevent stuff like this as part of their plan, and they didn't. Or accept help to stop the situation, but they didn't. So I don't usually get frustrated with stuff. I try not to. I try to keep it lighthearted and fun here. But this one's just annoying as shit. There is no reason that this shouldn't have been solved in like 12 hours. Could have had a tactical team there. We already know you had gas grenades. And guess what? Those canisters are pretty hard. You could have chucked it through a window or all the windows. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's the American in me that's annoyed by it, because I know how this would have been solved here, and it wouldn't have lasted that long. And because we generally don't have military operations on our own soil like that. But we do have SWAT teams that were a thing by this point in time. And most SWAT teams are made up of, a lot of them have military vets in them. And they're all super highly trained. But the one dickhead in Germany that you can find that had any experience with a rifle, you gave it to him, he had a clean shot, and he hit the guy in the foot. I don't know. I'm just, I'm annoyed. I'm frustrated. I'm glad this episode's over. I'm going to stop rambling and ranting now. With that being said, if you would like to support the show, You can go over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. Gets you early access to my show. It gets you early access to Guestnicity with Luther. It gets you early access to Almost Fiction with Chase. It gets you early access and backdoor access to 911 calls with the operator, and Never Daily, which is usually Sam and Chase. I got to get back on there because I haven't talked to those guys in a while, and they're fun. Also gets you backdoor access to Guestnicity. The other thing I'm going to plug here is something that I don't push usually too hard. I have a Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/History Goon Pod. And I put out a little video before this episode went up. If you watch that video and then you watch this, you'll see we're in the same orange flannel. So continuity and whatnot. Anything donated between the recording date here is 11/28, so day after Thanksgiving. Anything that's donated to that Ko-Fi between now and January 1st, I'm going to donate to a local dog rescue. It's run by a friend of mine. She does great work. She takes in dogs from like kill shelters down south, rehabilitates them and adopts them out to people up here. She does fantastic work, and I want to try to help out with that a little bit because I like dogs. I love dogs, actually. And dogs deserve better. Dogs are good people. Dogs are some of the best people I know. So if you want to donate to that, you want to throw $5 at it, a couple bucks at it, that's awesome. I would greatly appreciate it. And I appreciate any support you guys have, whether it be with rating and reviewing the show, leaving Spotify reviews, which I got to go through and read the reviews from last season. At some point, I think that would be a lot of fun to kind of go through episode by episode and read them. I know there's 30 episodes, but thankfully there's not a ton of comments. If I start getting more and more, I'd have to do it like every couple weeks to get it out there. But also, if you haven't yet, please head over to YouTube and subscribe to the History Goon channel there. I would greatly appreciate it because eventually, if I can get that to take off and I can get this to take off and I can start making money, I'd be able to do this full time and put episodes out faster and more frequently and better researched, which I think personally, not to blow my own horn, I think my research is pretty decent, right? Considering I'm a guy that barely graduated from high school, and anyway, I'm rambling again. But we'll be back to finish this nightmare off, and then that'll be episode 3. Episode 4, we're going back to like Revolutionary War times. So that'll just be full of terrible language, like not bad language, just badly written and spoken language. But it'll be fun, and it's gonna be interesting. The next episode, but anyway, we're all gonna die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world. Maybe not like these guys. Love you.